There's a man out past the dry wash who does a thing no cowboy in his right mind would do. He grows flowers. Not a small patch by the door for a wife to look at. No, rows of them. Careful rows, watered by hand from a bucket he carries a quarter-mile because the well near his house went bitter years back. Desert marigold, blue flax, wild poppies the color of a struck match. He grows them in a country that kills soft things for sport, and he does it alone, and he does it every single morning before the heat can find him. The town has a word for a man like that, and it isn't a kind one. I used to laugh with the rest of them. I did. God forgive me, I whittled little wooden fools on my porch and told myself he'd earned every joke. Then one October morning, an Apache woman walked out of the hills and stood at the edge of his field. She stood there a long time with her back to me, still as a fence post, looking at those flowers. And when she finally turned around, her face was doing something I have no good word for, grief and fury, and something older than both. That's the day I stopped laughing. Because that's the day I found out why the lonely cowboy grew flowers instead of pride, and I have not slept an easy night since. Let me tell it the way it happened. The wind came down off the Chiricahuas that morning like it had somewhere to be, and it carried the dust with it, and the dust got into everything, my coffee, my collar, the little wooden coyote I'd been shaping since Tuesday. I keep my hands busy, always have. My wife Martha used to say I whittled the way other men drank, to keep from thinking, and she wasn't wrong, and she's been in the ground 11 years now, so I suppose I've had a lot of thinking to keep from. I was on my porch that morning, the coyote taking shape wrong in my fingers when I saw the woman. She came out of the low hills to the east, walking the way people walk when they've walked a long time, no hurry left in it, just the mechanical forward of a body that has decided it will arrive or die trying. She was Apache. I knew it before I could have told you how. Something in the set of the shoulders, the way she read the ground with her eyes as she came, quick and constant, the habit of people who have had to. She wore a faded calico dress and a man's canvas coat too big for her, and her hair was tied back with a strip of something red. She didn't come toward my place. She went toward Amos Care's. Now I should tell you about Amos, because you'll understand nothing without it, and I understood nothing myself for the better part of 9 years. Amos Care had the section next to mine, 40 acres of it worth spitting on and the rest worth less. He'd come out from somewhere back east Ohio, I heard once, though he never said and I never asked, sometime after the war, the big one, the one that emptied out a generation of men and sent the leftovers west to be quiet. He was quiet. Lord, he was quiet. You could ride your whole life next to Amos Care and not collect 100 words from him, and half of those would be about weather. And he grew flowers. The first year I thought it was a joke or a phase or grief. A man will do strange things behind grief, I of all people know that, but the flowers kept coming. Spring after spring. He'd plant in the cool months and haul water in the hot ones, that bucket swinging off his bad shoulder, his hat pulled low, and he'd tend those rows like a man tends children. Blue flax that shivered in the wind. Marigold gone gold as a wedding ring. And in the middle of it, where you'd expect a scarecrow or a bench, nothing. Just a bare patch he never planted, kept swept clean, for reasons I could not have told you. The town made him a figure of fun. Flower Care, Petal Amos. The boys at the mercantile had a whole routine, and God help me, I let them, and sometimes I joined in, because it is easier to laugh at a lonely man than to look too hard at why a body ends up that way. So there I was that October morning, watching this Apache woman walk straight across the scrub toward Amos Care's flower field, and I set my knife down. Because here is a thing you learn, living out here as long as I have. In that country in those years, an Apache and a white man in the same field was not a small thing. It was 1889. The wars were done, but the memory of them wasn't. Memory doesn't sign treaties. Geronimo was 3 years gone to Florida in chains, and half the men in our town had ridden in the campaigns that put him there, and they carried that pride the way some men carry a limp, visible in everything they did. An Apache walking free and alone into a white man's field could get herself shot for it, and no lawman for 200 miles would trouble the shooter with questions. She didn't seem to care, or she cared and had decided the caring didn't matter anymore. I've since come to believe it was the second one. I got up. I'll admit my first thought wasn't a noble one. It was that I did not want to see a woman killed on my Tuesday. My second thought, close behind, was that Amos was out there. Amos was always out there in the mornings, kneeling in his rows. I started walking. The wind pushed at my back the whole way, hot already, carrying the smell of dust and creosote and faint, something sweeter, the flowers, I realized, dumb as it sounds. I'd smelled Amos's flowers before but never let myself notice. Now with a stranger walking into them I noticed everything, the way you do when you sense something is about to break. She'd stopped at the edge of the field. Amos was maybe 30 feet in on his knees, bucket beside him, and he'd gone still. I could see the back of his neck under his hat, red from the sun, and I could see he'd seen her, because a man who is truly working doesn't hold that particular kind of still. He held it the way a rabbit holds still. The way I've held still myself once or twice, when the thing coming toward me was larger than I was. The woman looked at the flowers. I want to describe her face, but I couldn't see it yet. She had her back to me, remember. I could only read her from behind, and what I read was a stillness even deeper than Amos's, a stillness that seemed to go down into the ground. She stood at the edge of that bright, ridiculous field of blue and gold in a country the color of old bone, and she looked at it, and she did not move for a long, long time. Then she said something, in Apache. I didn't have the words, but I had the tone, and the tone was a question asked with the last of something. The last of hope, maybe, or the last of patience. Amos didn't turn around. He stayed on his knees in the dirt with his back to her, and I saw his shoulders come up around his ears, and I understood, I don't know how, but I understood clean and cold that he knew her, or knew what she was, or knew what she'd come for. Amos, I called out, because I'm a coward and the silence was unbearable. Everything all right out here? He didn't answer. Neither of them looked at me. It was as if I'd shouted into a room where a man and a woman were burying a child and been correctly ignored. The woman spoke again, and this time there was English in it, broken but clear. You, she said. It was you. And Amos Care, who I had known 9 years and never once seen weep, who had buried the joke of himself under 60 tons of desert silence, made a sound I have not been able to unhear. It wasn't a word. It came up out of him like something being pulled loose from deep. And he put both his dirty hands over his face, kneeling there in his flowers, and he began to shake. I stopped where I was. Some part of me knew this wasn't mine to walk into. The woman took one step into the field, then another. She walked between the rows of flax and marigold, careful, not crushing a single stem. I noticed that, I don't know why, that she took care of the flowers even then. She walked to that bare, swept patch in the middle, the one he never planted, and she stood over it. And she turned around. That's when I saw her face. And I'll set my knife down again just remembering it. Her face was not the face of a woman who had come for revenge. That's what I'd braced for. That's what the whole shape of the moment promised. But it wasn't that. It was the face of a woman who had spent 9 years believing everyone she loved was gone without a grave, without a marker, scattered and forgotten in a country that wanted to forget them, and who was now standing over the one place in the entire world where somebody had remembered. She looked down at the bare earth Amos kept swept clean. Then she looked at the flowers around it, the ones he'd been growing and tending and hauling water for, alone, for 9 years, in a place that mocked him for it. And I watched her understand. I watched her understand that the flowers were graves. She made a sound then too, not like his. Hers went up, high and cracked, and it carried on the wind all the way to where I stood frozen, and it raised every hair on my body, because I had heard that sound exactly once before in my life, at my Martha's burial, out of my own mouth, when they lowered her, and I finally believed it. It's the sound a person makes when grief they've been carrying alone is suddenly, impossibly, shared. She dropped to her knees in the swept dirt across from Amos. The two of them knelt there in the flowers, an old white man and an Apache woman, a body's length of bare grave between them, both shaking, neither able to look up. And I did the only decent thing I did that whole morning. I turned around and I walked home, and I left them to it. I sat on my porch a long time after. I picked up the little coyote and I couldn't make my hands work. The wind had died down some. The smell of the flowers had followed me, or I imagined it had. I kept thinking about that bare patch he swept clean and never planted. 9 years I'd ridden past it. 9 years I'd made my little jokes. And it had been a grave the whole time, kept ready, kept waiting for someone. That night I did a thing I hadn't done since Martha died. I went out to my own porch after dark with a lantern, and I whittled until my fingers cramped, and I made not a coyote or a jackrabbit but the crude shape of a flower, and I set it on the sill, and I couldn't have told you why. I only knew that somewhere across the dark scrub, two people who had been alone for 9 years were, for the first time, not. And I knew, the way you know a storm's coming by the way the birds go quiet, that this wasn't the end of anything. Because the town would find out. The town found out everything. And a white man who grew flowers over Apache graves, who'd kept an Apache woman weeping in his field, was a thing our town was not going to let stand. I just didn't yet know the worst of it. I didn't know why those graves were there. I didn't know what Amos Care had done, or hadn't done, on the day the earth beneath his flowers got filled. I found that out later. I wish to God I hadn't. For 3 days after that morning, I didn't ride near Amos Care's place. It felt like walking past a house where someone had died. You keep your eyes forward, and you let the family have their grief. But on the 4th day, he came to me. I was at the woodpile behind my house, splitting mesquite, when I heard a horse and turned, and there he was, sitting his old bay at the edge of my yard, hat in his hands. Amos Care had not been to my place in maybe 2 years, and that time it was to return a post-hole digger. He looked older than he had 4 days before. A man can age years in a night. I'd done it myself. "Wendell," he said. "Amos." We stood there. I set the axe down. My hands wanted the knife, wanted something to do, but I made them be still. "You saw," he said. "It wasn't a question. I saw a woman. I saw you both grieving. I didn't see any of my business, so I went home." He nodded slow, like that answer cost him and paid him at once. He got down off the horse stiff, that bad shoulder hitching. He was quiet a while, looking off toward the hills the woman had come out of. "Her name's Taya," he said finally. "She's staying out at my place, in the lean-to. I want you to know that before somebody in town tells you something uglier." I said staying was his own affair. "It's not going to stay my own affair," he said. "Bilson saw her at the well yesterday when he rode by. So it started already." He turned the hat in his hands around and around the way I turned my whittling. "I came to tell you the truth of it myself, Wendell, before the town makes its own. You've been a decent neighbor. You never came out and asked, but you never spat at me neither, and out here that's near to friendship." He almost smiled. "It didn't reach anywhere. You want to hear it." I did not want to hear it. I want to be honest with you. Some part of me had spent 9 years liking that Amos Care was just a strange, sad man who grew flowers, because that was a thing I could ride past. I sensed that what he was about to tell me would be a thing I'd have to carry. I told him to come sit on the porch. I got out the jug. He didn't touch his. I whittled. I couldn't help it, and he watched my hands for a bit like they steadied him. And then he told me, and I'm going to tell it to you close to the way he told me, because he'd clearly been saying it to himself in the dark for a long time, and it came out worn smooth as a creek stone. He'd been 19, he said. 1868. Not a soldier exactly, a hired hand, a wrangler for a column of volunteers. You have to understand what that word covered in those days, volunteers. It didn't mean army. It meant men from a settlement who'd got a grievance, real or imagined, and a taste for settling it, and a territory that would look the other way. There'd been raids that season. Stock run off, a family killed on the Sonita Road. That part was real, Amos said. That part was true. A mother and 2 children among them, and the men who rode out had that in their teeth. But they didn't find the ones who'd done it. Amos said that plain, and it seemed to be the center of the whole thing for him. They didn't find the ones who did it. They found a rancheria up a canyon 2 days' ride off. A camp. And there was no proof in it, no stolen stock, nothing, just people. Mostly women and old ones and children, because the men were off hunting or raiding elsewhere. He never knew which, and it didn't matter to what happened next. He stopped there a long while. I didn't feel the silence. I'd learned that much from Martha's dying. You don't fill a person's silence. You just sit inside it with them. I was holding the horses, he said. That was my job. I held the horses at the mouth of the canyon while the men went up. His voice had gone very flat. I heard it start. I want to tell you I didn't understand what I was hearing, but I was 19, not 5. I understood. I stood there holding those horses, and I understood every sound of it. The bay shifted in my yard. Amos looked at it. There was a boy, he said, ran down the canyon, right at me. 6, maybe 7 years old, running the way you run when the world's ending behind you, and there was a man behind him, one of ours, and I. His hands had stopped turning the hat. They just held it. I didn't shoot the boy. I want that known. I never fired a shot that whole day, and I've turned that over 10,000 times wondering if that makes me better than them or just a coward who couldn't even do wrong with his whole chest. But I didn't fire. He swallowed. The man behind him did, right past me. The boy went down not 6 feet from where I stood holding those horses, and I looked at him, and he looked at me, and then he wasn't looking at anything. And I did nothing. I want you to hear the true shape of it, Wendell, because the town's going to make me either a devil or they're going to make excuses, and the truth is meaner than both. I did nothing. I stood and held the horses and let it happen, and when it was done, I helped water the animals and I rode out with the rest of them, and I did not say one word. I had stopped whittling. I didn't remember stopping. How many? I said. My voice came out wrong. I counted later, he said, when I came back. He said it like that was a confession worse than the rest. 26, 11 of them children. The wind moved through the mesquite. Somewhere a dove was making its stupid soft sound, the same sound it makes over a wedding or a killing, because a dove doesn't know the difference, and I have always half hated them for it. You came back, I said. He nodded. Not for years. I tried to be a regular man first. Went home to Ohio. Couldn't sit in a church. Couldn't sit at a table. Married a good woman and couldn't be a husband to her because every time I closed my eyes there was that boy looking at me, and she deserved a whole man, and I was change scattered on the ground. He rubbed his face. She left me, rightly, and I came back out here because it was the only place that made sense, the only place that matched what I was on the inside. I found the canyon. Took me a season of asking careful questions to find it again. And they were still there, he said, and his voice finally broke on it, just a little, a hairline crack. Nobody'd buried them, Wendell. 9 years and the volunteers never spoke of it, and no soldier ever came, and no Apache could come back to that ground and live. So they were just the animals, and the weather there wasn't much. There wasn't much left to bury, but there was some, and I buried it, all of it. Took me most of a summer doing it right, one at a time, and I didn't know their names, so I couldn't mark them the way you'd want. So you grew flowers, I said. He looked at me, and I understood the whole 9 years at once, the bucket and the bad well and the town's jokes and my own jokes, all of it, understood it like a door opening onto a cold room. A marker gets pulled up or fell over or burned, he said. A flower comes back. Every spring it comes back on its own if you tend the ground right, if you keep at it. I figured if I couldn't give them names, I'd give them that. Something that came back. Something alive on that ground where I let so much die. He shook his head. It's not enough. I know it's not enough. Nothing's enough. But it was the only true thing I had left to do, and I've done it every morning for 9 years, and I'll do it till I drop in the rows, and I've made my peace that no one would ever know why, and that was right too, that was part of it. Wasn't supposed to be for anyone to understand. Wasn't penance if it got me anything, even understanding. I asked him about the bare patch, the one he kept swept and never planted. He was quiet the longest time yet. There was a woman, he said, in the camp. I saw her at the start before it. She had a baby on her back and a little girl by the hand, and she was running for the rocks, and she made it. Wendell, I saw her make it into the high rocks with those 2 children. I saw it, and it's the one clean thing in the whole memory, the one thing I've held on to, that somebody got out. That some of them got clear. I never knew if it was true or if I made it up because I needed it. But I kept that patch open, kept it swept, in case. He couldn't finish for a second. In case someone ever came back looking, so there'd be a place for them that wasn't a grave, a place to stand that I'd kept ready. I thought about Taya walking out of those hills, walking straight to the one swept patch, standing on it and turning around. The girl, I said. By the hand. Amos nodded, and the tears came down his weathered face without any sound at all. The way an old man cries when he's cried out everything loud years ago. She's the woman in my lean-to, he said. She was that little girl. Her mother got them into the rocks and up over the ridge, and they lived, the 3 of them, and her mother told her before she died where it happened, told her all her life so it wouldn't be forgotten. And Taya spent 9 years and God knows how many miles trying to find the ground her people died on so she could do the thing a person does, grieve at a place. And she found it grown over in flowers. His breath hitched. She thought at first I'd made a mockery of it. She came into that field ready to kill me for it. And then she saw the swept patch, and she understood I'd kept it for her, kept a place for her for 9 years without knowing if she was alive. I have been out here 40 years by. I have seen droughts kill whole herds, and I have buried my wife, and I have watched this country do everything a country can do to a person. I did not know I had a thing left in me that could be broken open. But I sat on my own porch that afternoon with an axe I'd forgotten and a knife gone still in my hand, and I put my face down, and I broke open like green wood. Why are you telling me? I said when I could. You kept it 9 years, why tell me now? And Amos Care put his hat back on slow and stood up. And I saw in his face that he'd already understood the thing I was only starting to. Because Bilson saw her, he said. Because it's coming. And when it comes, Wendell, I'm going to need one man in this valley to know the truth of what those flowers are, so that after whatever they do, there's one man left who can tell it right. He got up on the bay. I've buried 26 people no one would speak for. I've had a long time to make my peace with dying badly. But Taya just got her family back 4 days ago in the only way she ever could. And I'll be damned to the deepest part of hell before I let this town take that ground from her too. He rode off toward his flowers. And I sat there a long while, and then I went inside, and I got down the little wooden things off my windowsill. The coyotes, the jackrabbits, the crooked flower I'd made in the dark, and I looked at them. And I understood I'd been doing a small, dumb version of the same thing he had, all these years, making little living-looking shapes to set against all the things that don't come back. Then I cleaned my rifle. I hadn't cleaned it in 2 years. I didn't fully know yet what I meant to do with it. But I was starting to. They came on a Sunday, which I have always thought says something about men, that they'll do their worst on the day they've just been told to do their best. I'd been watching for it the better part of a week. You could feel it building in town the way you feel a dry storm, the air gone tight, the talk at the mercantile dropping to a mutter when I walked in, Billson holding court by the harness pegs with that voice of his that carries whether you want it to or not. An Apache. On Care's land. Living there. And the other thing, the older thing underneath it, the thing that had nothing to do with Taya and everything to do with what those men needed to believe about themselves. That what had been done to her people had been justice, and that a man growing flowers over their bones was calling every one of them a murderer just by kneeling in the dirt each morning. They needed those flowers gone. I understood that finally. It wasn't about the woman at all. It was that Amos Care's whole quiet life was an accusation, and they'd been able to laugh it off as long as it was just a sad man and some marigolds. But now there was a witness kneeling beside him. Now it had a face. I rode over to Amos's Saturday night and told him what was coming. He already knew. Taya was there. I met her proper for the first time in the light of his one lamp, and I'll tell you she was nothing like the broken thing I'd braced for. She was a woman maybe 35 with a stillness to her that made the room feel small. She'd taken over the cooking. There was a pot of beans going and she'd found dried chilies somewhere and made his poor bachelor food into something a person would want to eat. And there was, God help me, a jar of his flowers on the table. Blue flax. She'd cut a few and put them in water where they could both see them while they ate. That undid me somehow, more than any of it. That after everything, the two of them sat and ate supper together with flowers on the table. She looked at me a long moment when Amos said I was a friend, reading me the way she'd read the ground coming out of the hills. Then she nodded once and said in her careful English, "You will tell it right. He says you will tell it right." And I understood Amos had told her the same thing he'd told me, that I was the one who'd carry the truth after. I didn't like the sound of after any better in her mouth. "You should both go," I said. "Tonight, there's country north of here I can give you." "No," Taya said, simple as that, not loud. She looked at the flowers on the table and then out the dark window toward the field. "My mother walked me 100 miles from this ground to keep me alive. 9 years I walk back to it." She shook her head slow. "I do not leave it again, not for them, not for anyone." And Amos, I watched Amos's face while she said it, and I saw a man who had lived 9 years wanting to die well finally find the thing he'd been waiting to die for. And I want to tell you it was a terrible thing to watch. A man look that at peace. "I'm not running, Wendell," he said. "I ran once, held the horses and rode out and said nothing. I've been running from that canyon for 20 years and I am done running from it." He put his hand flat on the table. "This is where I stop." So I stayed the night. I told myself it was to talk sense into them. It wasn't. I stayed because I'd be damned if I'd leave those two to face it alone, and because somewhere in the last week the whittled fool version of myself had died on my own porch and left something harder behind. They came about mid-morning. 9 of them. Billson at the front and Creddy the blacksmith and the Hollies boys and some others who I'd known 30 years and thought I understood and found out I didn't. They had rifles, but they weren't carrying them like men who decided. They were carrying them like men who wanted to be talked into it, and that scared me worse. A decided man you can maybe reason with. It's the ones working up their nerve that do the ugliest things. Amos walked out to meet them. He walked out into his own flowers and stood in the middle of them in his rows, unarmed. I told him to carry his rifle. He wouldn't. "I stand in these flowers with a gun," he said, "and I've made a lie of them." I stood off to his left with mine at the edge of the field, and I made sure they saw it, and I saw Billson clock me and go a shade less certain, because I was known and I was white and I was old and shooting Wendell Price would take some explaining even in that country. Taya stood in the doorway of the house. Amos had begged her to stay inside. She would not. Billson did the talking. He always did. He said the woman couldn't stay. Said it wasn't right, an Apache on good land. Said there were folks in town who wouldn't stand for it. Said it's slow and mean and enjoying it. And then he got to the real thing, couldn't help himself, and he waved a hand at the flowers and his voice got ugly. Said it was time somebody plowed this. He used a word for it I won't put down, plowed this garden under. Said a man who'd tend Apache graves like a woman ought to be run off the same as the squaw. I saw Amos's jaw work. I saw him choose not to answer the insult. 9 years of swept dirt in that choice. You can plow it under, Amos said, quiet, so quiet they all leaned in to hear it, which is a trick I've since realized he did on purpose. You can plow it under this morning and salt it and you'll not stop it. Flowers come back, Billson. That's the whole reason I planted them. You could kill me right here in the rows and next spring they'd come up through wherever you put me and this valley would look out and remember every year forever what's under this ground. He let that sit. You want them gone so you can forget, that's all this is. And I'm telling you there's not enough plows in the territory. Some things you don't get to forget. I've tried. It doesn't work. I'm the living proof and so's she and so if you're honest men are you. Nobody moved. The dove was going somewhere off behind the house, soft and stupid. And then Creddy, the blacksmith, a decent enough man most days, said the thing that nearly tipped it. He said low, "There ain't no graves here, it's a story. He's soft in the head and she's playing him." And he took a step into the flowers, and he raised his boot to bring it down on a row of flax, to prove it was nothing, just weeds, just a crazy man's weeds. And Taya crossed the whole field. I don't know how she got there so fast. One moment she was in the doorway and the next she was between Creddy's boot and the flowers, on her knees, and she plunged both her hands into the dirt at the base of the flax and pulled not the flowers, the earth beside them, digging with her fingers like an animal, and she brought up out of the ground something small and pale, and she held it up so all 9 of them could see. A little clay bead, blue, the kind of bead a woman strings for a child. "My sister," she said. Her voice did not shake. It rang out over that field like a struck bell. "This is my sister. She wore these. My mother made them. She was 4 years old." She dug again, further along the row, and brought up something else. I couldn't see what, a bit of bone or shell, and held it up too. "This ground is full of us. Every flower is one of us. You want to plow us under so you can say we were never here." She stood up, dirt to her elbows, the bead in her fist held high, and she looked at each of those 9 men in turn, slow, unafraid, and not one of them could hold her eyes. "I have walked 100 miles to find where my family is buried, and I have found it, and it is full of flowers." Her voice cracked then, finally, but it cracked upward into fury, into something holy. "You will not touch this ground. You will have to kill me in it, and then I will be one more flower, and you will still have to look at it every spring, and you will know." There is a silence that comes over men when they have been shown the exact size of the thing they were about to do. I've felt it maybe twice in my life. It came over that field like cold water. Creddy stepped back, put his boot down on bare dirt, careful, away from the flax. He wouldn't look at Amos. He wouldn't look at anybody. And here is the part I've turned over most in the years since. Here is the morally heavy thing, the thing Amos did, that I still don't know all the way how to weigh. He could have let it end there. He'd won it near enough. The men were shamed and shaken, and half of them already wanted to be home. He could have let them slink off carrying their shame, and left it at that. Instead, Amos Care, standing in his flowers, said, "You want to know who else is here?" And he named them. Not their names, he'd never had those, that was his whole grief. He named the men, the volunteers. He stood there, and in that ringing silence he said the names of every man he could remember who'd ridden up that canyon in 1868, and 3 of those names, 3, belonged to fathers and uncles of men standing right there in his field with rifles. He named them. He told those 9 men that their own blood had done this thing, that the ground they wanted plowed under was a thing their own people had made. And he named the names so there'd be no more pretending it was one crazy man's story. It was the most dangerous thing I ever watched a person do. He handed them a reason to kill him on the spot, to bury the names with the man saying them. And for one long, long moment I thought they would. I had my rifle up. I truly thought I was about to watch it or take part in it out there in the marigolds. But it didn't come. I've thought about why, and I think it's this. A lie can be killed, but a true thing that's already been said out loud in front of 9 witnesses can't be. Amos had made sure of it. He'd made his own death useless to them. If they shot him now, every man there would carry the names and the murder, and they knew it, and one by one they turned their horses. Billson was last. He looked at Amos a long time. Then he looked at the flowers, all that blue and gold shivering in the wind over the bones of people his neighbors had killed, and something moved in his face that I'd never seen there and never saw again. He didn't say sorry. Men like Billson don't. But he took off his hat, just for a second. Then he put it back on and rode off, and the rest went with him, and the dust of them hung gold in the morning light, and then the wind took it. It was over. It was over, and no one had died, and I stood there shaking so hard I had to sit down in the dirt. Amos didn't sit. Amos turned around and went to Taya, who was still standing in the row with the blue bead in her fist and dirt to her elbows, and the two of them stood there, and he said something to her too low for me to hear, and she opened her hand and looked at the little bead, and then she closed it again and pressed her closed fist to her mouth and shut her eyes. I got up after a while and went home, left them to it, same as the first morning. Some things aren't yours to stand inside of. Taya stayed, I want you to know that. She lived out there the rest of Amos's life, which was 6 more years, and it was not a small or a shameful thing. The town never made peace with it exactly, but it stopped fighting it, and after a while a few folks even came out quiet in the spring to look at the flowers. And once I saw the youngest Holly's boy leave a jar of his mother's blue asters at the edge of the field, and ride off fast like he'd done something he was ashamed to be caught at, and I never told a soul. And I'm only telling you now, because they're all dead but me. Amos taught Taya every flower and where every grave was, so she'd know after he was gone. And when he did go, in the rose like he swore, one spring morning just didn't get up, Taya buried him at the edge of the field, not in it. He does not belong in it, she told me, and I flinched, and then she finished. He belongs guarding it, and I understood she'd forgiven him, a thing I don't think I could have forgiven, and I understood too that maybe that was the whole point of a life like his, to earn a forgiveness that big, and I don't know to this day if he earned it or if she just gave it, and maybe there's no difference and I'm too old and too plain a man to work it out. She planted flax on his grave. I'm the last one now. Taya went back north years ago to what people of hers were left and took a jar of that flax with her, seeds saved careful in a twist of paper, and I like to think there's a patch of it growing somewhere in country I'll never see, come up from this ground, remembering. I still whittle. My hands are bad now. Most mornings I sit on the porch and I look out toward Amos's field, which is mine now on paper, though I've never once called it mine. The flowers still come up every spring without a soul to tend them, thinner each year but coming, blue and gold over the bones, exactly like he said they would, and I go out and I pull the weeds back from them when my knees allow, an old man doing the last of a dead man's penance because somebody has to and there's no one left but me. I never did fire that rifle. I cleaned it and carried it, and in the end I never fired it, and I've decided that's the one thing in my life I got exactly right. Some mornings the wind comes down off the Chiricahuas carrying the smell of them, and I close my eyes, and I can almost hear him out there with his bucket, and the little clay bead is buried again where she put it back, down at the roots where it belongs, and I think about how a whole valley wanted to plow a thing under so they wouldn't have to remember, and how one lonely man grew a field so bright they never could. There's more I could tell you, about the girl who came, years after, asking after the flowers with her grandmother's eyes. But it's getting on, and the light's near gone, and some things you're meant to,